Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories. Tonight, we journey back to a time of profound friendship and devastating betrayal, to an age when the wizarding world was plunged into its first great war, and the choices of a few defined the fate of all. Settle in, quiet your mind, and let us explore the complete history of 4 brilliant, flawed, and legendary figures who forged a brotherhood in the halls of Hogwarts, a bond that would change the course of magic forever. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. Every great story, every myth that echoes through the ages, begins not with a single event, but with the convergence of disparate lives, each carrying the weight of their own unique history. The tale of the Marauders is no different. It is a saga in 4 parts, a quartet of destinies that began in 4 very different corners of the wizarding world. To understand the brotherhood they would build, the magic they would create, and the tragedy that would ultimately consume them, we must first understand the boys they were before they ever met. We must travel to a sunlit manor filled with love and longing, to a dark and noble house choked by pride, to a lonely cottage haunted by a monthly curse, and to a quiet home where ambition and fear wrestled in the heart of a young boy. These were the crucibles that forged the 4 souls who would one day change the course of history. In the heart of the historic wizarding village of Godric's Hollow, there stood a home known as Potter Manor. It was a place of warmth, comfort, and considerable wealth, the ancestral seat of a pure-blood family as old and respected as any in Britain. The Potters could trace their lineage back through centuries of notable witches and wizards, all the way to the 12th century potioneer Linfred of Stinchcombe, and even further into the mists of legend, to Ignotus Peveril, one of the 3 brothers who were said to have met death on a lonely road and received from him the gift of the invisibility cloak. For generations, the family had been known for their quiet integrity, their occasional eccentricity, and a steadfast refusal to align themselves with the more fanatical pure-blood ideologies that were beginning to fester in the darker corners of their society. By the mid-20th century, the manor was home to Fleamont and Euphemia Potter. Fleamont was a gifted potioneer, a man whose cleverness had not only maintained the family's considerable fortune, but had quadrupled it. He was the inventor of Sleekeasy's hair potion, a remarkably effective concoction sold with the slogan, 2 drops tames the most bothersome Barnet. The potion was a wild success, so much so that when Fleamont eventually retired, he sold the company for a vast profit, ensuring the Potters' wealth for generations to come. He was a man who, despite his pure-blood heritage, carried a name from his grandmother's Muggle side, a fact that had forced him into more than a few duels during his Hogwarts years, which he credited for honing his impressive magical skill. He and his wife, Euphemia, lived a life of quiet comfort, respected by their community and wanting for nothing, save for one thing they desired above all else: a child. For years, Fleamont and Euphemia tried to start a family, but to no avail. They had long since given up hope, resigning themselves to a quiet, childless life in their grand home. It was to their profound shock and immeasurable joy when, late in life, Euphemia discovered she was pregnant. On the 27th of March, 1960, their only son, James Potter, was born. James's arrival was nothing short of a miracle for his elderly parents, and they treated him as such. He was doted upon, cherished, and, by all accounts, thoroughly spoiled. Growing up in the secure and loving bubble of Potter Manor, James knew only privilege and adoration. He was the center of his parents' world, a bright, energetic boy who was given everything he ever wanted. This upbringing forged in him a powerful, unshakable self-confidence. It was a confidence that bordered on arrogance, an assumption that the world was his stage and everyone else was merely a player. He developed what could only be described as a king-of-the-world attitude, an easy entitlement that came from a life devoid of hardship or want. This was the flaw at the core of the young James Potter, a casual cruelty born not of malice, but of a profound lack of perspective. He simply could not comprehend a world that did not revolve around him. Yet this same gilded cage of a childhood also instilled in him his greatest virtues. The unconditional love he received from Fleamont and Euphemia taught him how to love in return, fiercely and without reservation. The security of his home fostered in him a deep and abiding capacity for generosity and loyalty. Unlike other ancient pure-blood families who were turning inward, consumed by prejudice and fear, the Potters remained open-hearted. Their home was a place of welcome, a sanctuary. This was never more evident than when years later a 16-year-old boy, disowned and desperate, would appear on their doorstep. Fleamont and Euphemia took in James's best friend, Sirius Black, without a moment's hesitation, treating him as a second son and giving him the family he had never truly had. This act reveals the true nature of the Potter household. It was a home built on a foundation of love, not just lineage. It was this environment that shaped James. His journey would not be one of overcoming a dark or traumatic past, but of maturing beyond the comfortable confines of his own privilege. The arrogant bully and the selfless hero who would one day die for his family were not two different people. They were two sides of the same golden coin, one that had been minted in the unwavering love and security of Potter Manor. He was born with a good heart. He just needed to learn how to use it for people other than himself. In stark contrast to the sunlit warmth of Potter Manor stood number 12, Grimold Place, the London townhouse of the noble and most ancient House of Black. It was a house that seemed to have absorbed the very soul of its inhabitants. dark, cold, and suffocating under the weight of its own history. The Blacks were one of the oldest and wealthiest pure-blood families in the wizarding world, a dynasty that prized its heritage above all else. Their fanatical devotion to blood purity was enshrined in their family motto, toujours pur, always pure. To be born a Black was to be born into a rigid and unforgiving ideology. The family tree, an ancient tapestry that dominated a wall in Grimmauld Place, was not just a record of lineage, it was a testament to their intolerance. Any family member who dared to deviate from their tyrannical rules by marrying a Muggle-born, or even a so-called blood traitor like a Weasley was unceremoniously burnt out, their face scorched from the tapestry as if they had never existed. Marius Black was disowned for the simple crime of being born a squib, Cedrella Black for marrying Septimus Weasley, Andromeda Black for loving a Muggle-born, Ted Tonks. The message was clear. Loyalty to the family's ideals was paramount, and love was conditional upon obedience. Into this oppressive environment, Sirius Black was born, the eldest son of Orion and Walburga Black, who were themselves second cousins. From his earliest days, it was clear that Sirius was not like the rest of his family. Where they were dark, he was bright. Where they were cruel, he possessed a rebellious spark of defiance. He saw the hypocrisy and hatred at the core of his family's beliefs and rejected them utterly. This rejection was not a quiet, internal struggle. It was a loud and public rebellion. He decorated his bedroom with Gryffindor banners and posters of Muggle girls in bikinis, a deliberate and constant provocation to his horrified parents. His true act of defiance came on his first day at Hogwarts. The Sorting Hat barely touched his head before shouting, "Gryffindor!" breaking a long and unbroken tradition of Blacks being sorted into Slytherin. For his family, this was the ultimate betrayal, a public shaming. For Sirius, it was a declaration of independence. At Hogwarts, he found his true home, not in the cold halls of Grimmauld Place, but in the boisterous, welcoming common room of Gryffindor Tower. And more importantly, he found his true family in James Potter, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. The conflict with his parents escalated throughout his school years. The values he embraced, bravery, loyalty to his friends regardless of their background, and a general disregard for stuffy rules, were the antithesis of everything the House of Black stood for. The final breaking point came when he was 16. Unable to endure the toxic atmosphere of his home any longer, he ran away. This was not a youthful whim. It was the desperate act of a refugee fleeing an abusive and ideologically poisonous environment. He was formally disowned, his name blasted from the family tapestry by his enraged mother. He found sanctuary at Potter Manor, where James's parents welcomed him with open arms. His uncle Alphard, his mother's brother, took pity on him and left him a decent bit of gold, an act of kindness for which he too was disowned. This history is crucial to understanding the man Sirius would become. He was not simply a charming rogue or a reckless thrill-seeker. He was a survivor of deep-seated emotional trauma. His identity was forged in the crucible of rebellion against the darkness he was born into. This is why his bond with his friends, particularly James, was so absolute. The Potters were not just a friend's family. They were his salvation. They provided the unconditional love and acceptance he had been denied his entire life. James was more than a best friend. He was the brother who replaced the one he had lost, Regulus, who had been seduced by the very darkness Sirius had fled. This desperate, foundational loyalty to his chosen family would define the rest of his life. It explains the depth of his grief after their deaths, the recklessness of his pursuit of Pettigrew, and his fierce, almost paternal devotion to Harry. Sirius Black spent his life fighting against the legacy of his name, and in the Marauders he found a new one, Padfoot. It was a name that signified not the family he was born into, but the one he had chosen, the one he would live and die for. Far from the ancient manners of the Potters and the Blacks, in a world that straddled the line between magical and muggle, the story of Remus Lupin began. He was born on the 10th of March, 1960, the only child of Lyle Lupin, a wizard, and his muggle wife, Hope Howell. Lyle was a clever wizard, a recognized world authority on non-human spirituous apparitions, such as boggarts and poltergeists. He had met Hope in a dense Welsh forest where she had been taking a walk. Believing she was being menaced by a large and vicious-looking man, she screamed. Lyle, hearing her, rushed to her aid and, with a flick of his wand, reduced the boggart to a field mushroom. Hope, initially terrified, was captivated by the strange, kind man who had saved her. They fell in love, and Lyle eventually confessed that she had never been in any real danger. Their son, Remus, was a happy, healthy boy who showed early signs of magic. His parents dreamed of the day he would attend Hogwarts and follow in his father's footsteps. But their peaceful life was shattered by a single, fateful encounter born of prejudice and a thirst for revenge. By the time Remus was 4, Lyle was working for the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. The First Wizarding War was beginning to cast its long shadow, and Lord Voldemort was actively recruiting dark creatures to his cause. Lyle's work brought him into contact with a werewolf named Fenrir Greyback, who was brought in for questioning regarding the deaths of 2 Muggle children. Greyback, who was not on the werewolf register, played the part of a confused Muggle tramp, but Lyle recognized the subtle signs of lycanthropy. He urged his colleagues to detain Greyback for 24 hours, as the full moon was approaching. His warnings were laughed off. Enraged by their complacency, Lyle lost his temper and declared that all werewolves were soulless, evil, deserving nothing but death. This outburst, this moment of unthinking prejudice, sealed his son's fate. Greyback, overhearing the insult, escaped custody before his memory could be wiped. His revenge was swift and terrible. He sought out Lyle's home, and under the light of the next full moon, forced his way into young Remus's bedroom and attacked him. Lyle arrived in time to save his son's life, driving Greyback from the house with powerful curses. But it was too late. Remus was infected, and doomed to become a werewolf for the rest of his life. Lyle Lupin was consumed by guilt. His own careless words had brought this curse upon his family. He never forgave himself, and for years he kept the true reason for the attack a secret from Remus, fearing his son's hatred. The family's life became a lonely, nomadic existence. They moved from town to village, never staying long enough for rumors about Remus's monthly illnesses to take root. His parents adored him, but their lives were consumed by fear and worry. As Remus grew, so did the wolf within him. What began as a small boy who could be contained in a locked room with silencing charms became a powerful creature, capable of smashing down doors and breaking windows. Remus grew up in total isolation, forbidden from playing with other children, taught from a young age that he was a danger, a shameful secret that must be hidden from the world. Just before his 11th birthday, when his parents had all but given up hope that he could ever have a normal life, a visitor arrived, Albus Dumbledore. The Hogwarts headmaster had heard of Remus's plight, as Greyback had boasted of the attack, and he came with an offer that seemed impossible. Dumbledore refused to see Remus as a monster. He believed the boy deserved an education and, more importantly, friendship. He had made special arrangements. A secret passage was constructed, leading from the Hogwarts grounds to a secluded house in Hogsmeade. Over the entrance to this passage, a violent tree, the Whomping Willow, was planted to keep anyone from stumbling upon it. Once a month, Remus would be taken to this house, which would soon become known as the Shrieking Shack, to transform in safety and isolation. For Remus, who had known nothing but loneliness, the chance to go to Hogwarts was the dream of his life. It was an opportunity to be normal, to have friends, to belong. This deep, desperate craving for acceptance became the cornerstone of his personality. When he was befriended by the popular, confident James Potter and Sirius Black, his gratitude was boundless. And when they discovered his terrible secret in their second year, and instead of abandoning him, embraced it, going to the extraordinary length of becoming Animagi just for him, that gratitude became an unbreakable, all-consuming bond. This gratitude, however, would become his tragic flaw. He loved his friends so deeply and was so thankful for their acceptance that his own moral compass was often compromised. He would later admit that he knew their bullying of Snape was wrong, but he never had the guts to stop them, terrified that any dissent might cause them to cast him out, leaving him alone once more. Remus Lupin became the conscience of the Marauders, but it was a conscience forever tempered by fear and a desperate need to be loved. He was the quiet, steady heart of the group, but a heart that carried a dark and painful secret, one that would forever make him feel like an outsider, even among his closest friends. The story of Peter Pettigrew is quieter than that of his friends, a narrative written in the margins and defined by what is absent. Unlike James, Sirius, and Remus, he was not born into great wealth, a notorious family, or a tragic curse. The canonical records of his early life are remarkably sparse. We know he was born around 1960, and we know of his mother, a witch who, after her son's supposed heroic death, was presented with his posthumous Order of Merlin, first class, along with the only thing that was found of him, a single severed finger. There is no mention of a father or any siblings. This lack of a detailed backstory is, in itself, telling. Peter Pettigrew enters the historical record not as a protagonist in his own right, but as an accessory to the lives of others. His defining moment at Hogwarts came before he even sat down at a house table. When the sorting hat was placed on his head, it fell silent. For more than 5 minutes, the hat deliberated, torn between two houses, Gryffindor and Slytherin. This made Peter a hat stall, a rare occurrence for a student in whom the defining traits of two opposing houses are so perfectly balanced. In the end, the hat chose Gryffindor, but that initial hesitation was nothing less than a prophecy. It was a literal manifestation of the fundamental conflict that would rage within Peter for his entire life. The war between the brave man he aspired to be and the cunning survivor he truly was. From his first days in Gryffindor, Peter attached himself to the brightest stars in his year, James Potter and Sirius Black. He was, by all accounts, a boy of average talent, described by Professor McGonagall as stupid and foolish. He was never in the same league as his friends, either in magical ability or in charisma. He was the follower, the sidekick, the one who hero-worshipped the popular, brilliant boys, and was content to live in their shadow. It was Remus Lupin's kindness that truly cemented Peter's place in the group. Remus, always a friend to the underdog, persuaded the more arrogant James and Sirius to accept the short and rather slow boy into their circle. Peter's decision to align himself with the most powerful and admired students in his house was a clear attempt to live up to his Gryffindor sorting through association. By becoming a Marauder, he could share in their glory, their daring, their bravery. He participated in their greatest act of loyalty, becoming an animagus for Remus. He helped create their greatest work of magical mischief, the Marauders map. For a time, his Gryffindor side, his loyalty to the friends who had given him a place to belong, seemed to win out. However, the sorting hat had seen the other half of his soul. His core nature was one of deep-seated cowardice and an instinct for self-preservation above all else. He was drawn to power, not for its own sake, but for the protection it offered. For 7 years at Hogwarts, James and Sirius were the greatest power in his small world, and he was loyal to them. But the world outside Hogwarts was a much larger, more dangerous place. When confronted with a power far greater and more terrifying than that of his friends, the power of Lord Voldemort, Peter's Slytherin nature, the one that had given the sorting hat pause for so long, finally asserted itself. His betrayal was not a sudden change of heart, or a fall from grace. It was the inevitable conclusion of the conflict that had defined him from the very beginning. He was a man who had spent his life trying to be a lion, only to discover, in his moment of greatest trial, that he was, and always had been, a rat. The Hatstall prophecy was fulfilled. The choice he made was not to abandon Gryffindor for Slytherin, but to finally admit which house he had truly belonged to all along. The great gray stones of Hogwarts Castle have borne witness to 1,000 years of magical history, but few eras are as steeped in legend as the 7 years from 1971 to 1978. This was the time of the Marauders. It was a time when 4 boys, bound by a secret too profound for their years, turned the ancient school into their personal playground. They were brilliant, they were reckless, and they pushed the boundaries of magic and mischief further than any students before or since. But their time at Hogwarts was not merely an age of pranks and adventure. It was lived under the growing shadow of the First Wizarding War, a conflict that would demand their loyalty, test their character, and ultimately set the stage for their tragic downfall. This is the story of how their brotherhood was forged in an act of impossible magic, immortalized on an enchanted piece of parchment, and forever stained by a bitter and relentless feud. On September 1st, 1971, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew boarded the Hogwarts Express, 4 disparate boys heading toward a shared destiny. James, brimming with the easy confidence of a cherished, wealthy son. Sirius, sharp-edged and defiant, already distancing himself from the dark legacy of his family. Remus, quiet and watchful, carrying the heavy secret of his lycanthropy, and Peter, nervous and eager to find his place. Their alliances and rivalries were forged almost immediately within the cramped confines of a train compartment. It was there that James and Sirius first encountered 2 other first years, Lily Evans, a bright-eyed muggle-born witch, and her sallow, hook-nosed friend, Severus Snape. When Snape, eager to share his knowledge with Lily, expressed his hope that she would be sorted into Slytherin, he unknowingly lit the fuse on a conflict that would last a lifetime. James, who until that point had shown no interest in them, overheard the word Slytherin and immediately interjected with disdain. "Who wants to be in Slytherin? I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" he asked Sirius, who readily agreed, despite his entire family having been in that house. It was an unprovoked attack, a casual display of the arrogance that defined the young James Potter. The ensuing argument saw James and Sirius bond over their shared contempt for Slytherin, mocking Snape's ambition and christening him with the cruel nickname Snivellus. As Lily and Snape left to find another compartment, James even tried to trip him, an early escalation to physical aggression. At the sorting ceremony, the 4 boys' paths were officially entwined. One by one, James, Sirius, Remus, and Peter were placed in Gryffindor House, while Lily Evans joined them, and Severus Snape was sent, as he had hoped, to Slytherin. The battle lines drawn on the train were now solidified by house loyalty. In the Gryffindor common room, the friendship between the 4 boys blossomed. James and Sirius were a natural pair. Their shared confidence, rebelliousness, and talent for magic, making them the instant leaders of their year. Remus, with his quiet intelligence and gentle nature, provided a steadying influence. It was his kindness that drew Peter into their circle. Where James and Sirius might have overlooked the less talented, slower boy, Remus saw a fellow outsider and extended his friendship, persuading the others to do the same. For a year, their friendship followed the normal course of schoolboys, exploring the castle, getting into trouble, and navigating classes. Remus, terrified of being ostracized, kept his condition a closely guarded secret, making up elaborate lies about his mother being ill to explain his monthly disappearances. But his friends were too clever to be fooled for long. In their second year, James and Sirius, with their sharp intellects and disregard for rules, pieced together the clues. Remus's recurring illnesses that always coincided with the full moon, his exhaustion and injuries afterward, and his disappearances from the dormitory. They figured out the truth. Their quiet, kind friend was a werewolf. For Remus, this was the moment he had dreaded his entire life. He was convinced that his friends, upon learning his monstrous secret, would abandon him, leaving him once again in the profound isolation he had known his entire childhood. But what happened next was, to him, a miracle. To his astonished gratitude, James and Sirius did not desert him. They did not fear him. Instead, they saw his plight not as a source of shame, but as a problem to be solved, a challenge to be met. Their reaction was not one of rejection, but of absolute, unwavering acceptance. And in that moment of acceptance, their friendship was transformed. It ceased to be a simple schoolboy camaraderie and became something far deeper, a bond that would soon be sealed by an extraordinary act of magic and loyalty. The discovery of Remus's secret became the defining event of the Marauders' time at Hogwarts. For James and Sirius, it was an injustice to be rectified. Their friend was forced into a lonely, painful transformation every month, and they refused to let him suffer alone. They quickly learned a crucial piece of werewolf lore. A werewolf is only a danger to humans. To an animal, the transformed wolf is no more than another creature of the night. This knowledge sparked an idea so audacious, so complex, and so profoundly illegal that only teenage boys with an abundance of talent and a deficit of caution could have conceived of it. They decided to become Animagi. The process of becoming an animagus is notoriously difficult and dangerous magic. It requires immense skill, patience, and nerve, and if performed incorrectly, can result in horrific, half-animal transformations. For the Ministry of Magic, it is a process so fraught with peril that it is strictly regulated. All who achieve it are required to register their form and distinguishing marks. James, Sirius, and Peter, of course, had no intention of involving the Ministry. Theirs would be a secret ritual, a clandestine act of brotherhood. From their second year onward, they dedicated themselves to mastering this arcane branch of transfiguration. The research alone was a monumental task, requiring them to delve into the most obscure corners of the Hogwarts library. The magic itself was even more daunting. The final steps of the transformation were a complex ritual involving holding a mandrake leaf in the mouth for an entire month, brewing a complex potion with ingredients like dew collected from a place untouched by sunlight or human feet for 7 days, and reciting an incantation, Amato Animo, Animato Animagus, at sunrise and sunset every day. The final step required them to place their wand over their heart, speak the incantation one last time, and drink the potion during a lightning storm. It took them 3 years of painstaking work. Finally, sometime in their 5th year, the conditions were right. Under the cover of James's invisibility cloak, the 4 boys snuck out to the Shrieking Shack. As a lightning storm raged outside, James, Sirius, and Peter completed the ritual. They drank the blood-red potion, and in a surge of painful, exhilarating magic, their bodies contorted and reshaped. James Potter became a magnificent stag, large and powerful, earning him the nickname Prongs. Sirius Black transformed into a huge, bear-like black dog, like the Grim of wizarding legend, and was dubbed Padfoot. Peter Pettigrew, reflecting his timid and subservient nature, became a small, twitching rat, whom they called Wormtail. Their first transformation as a group was a moment of pure triumph. They had succeeded. They had broken the law and bent the rules of magic itself, all for their friend. But their true test came with the next full moon. Remus had warned them of the horror of his own change, the agonizing pain as his bones snapped and reformed, the loss of his human mind to the wolf's feral instincts. He begged them just to watch the first time, terrified that even in their animal forms he might hurt them. That night, they witnessed the full, brutal reality of his curse. They watched as their friend screamed, his body twisting and breaking, his mind erased by the rising moon. The wolf that emerged was a creature of pure, violent instinct, so lost in its own pain that it would attack itself, tearing at its own flesh throughout the night. But James and Sirius, as a stag and a great dog, were large and powerful enough to intervene. Together, they could restrain the wolf, their animal forms calming its rage, their presence turning a night of solitary agony into something else entirely. As Remus himself would later say, they made his transformations not only bearable, but the best times of his life. No longer confined to the Shrieking Shack, the 4 of them would roam the castle grounds and the forbidden forest under the moonlit sky. A werewolf, a stag, a dog, and a rat, running free together. It was in these monthly excursions that their bond was truly sealed. They had created a private world for themselves, a secret society of 4 with their own names: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. This shared ritual of loyalty and rebellion was the foundation of their brotherhood. It was an act of love and defiance that defined them, giving them a sense of invincibility and a mastery over the castle that no other students had ever possessed. And it was this mastery that would lead to their next great creation. Their monthly nighttime explorations, conducted under the twin protections of their animagus forms, and James's invisibility cloak, gave the Marauders an unparalleled knowledge of Hogwarts Castle and its grounds. They discovered secret passages and hidden corners that not even the caretakers or professors knew existed. They learned the castle's rhythms, its secrets, its very heartbeat. Sometime between their 5th and 7th years, they decided to consolidate this vast repository of illicit knowledge into a single, extraordinary magical object: the Marauders map. The creation of the map was a feat of magical genius that stands as a testament to their collective brilliance. It was far more than a simple drawing. It was a living, breathing document, enchanted with some of the most advanced and complex magic known. The foundation of the map's power was the homunculus charm, an immensely difficult piece of magic that allowed the map to track the real-time movements of every single person and ghost within the castle walls. Each individual appeared as a tiny, labeled dot of ink, moving across the parchment. The power of this charm was astonishing. It was not fooled by any known form of magical concealment. It could see through invisibility cloaks, including James's own, which was a true hallow. It could penetrate the disguise of Polyjuice Potion, always showing a person's true name. And crucially for its creators, it could identify people in their animagus forms. This single charm transformed the map from a simple guide into the ultimate tool for mischief. With it, they could navigate the castle with impunity, avoiding teachers and filch, and planning their pranks with perfect precision. But the Marauders did not stop there. They imbued the map with a personality, a reflection of their own arrogant, mischievous spirits. To activate it, one had to tap the blank parchment with a wand and declare, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." To wipe it clean, the incantation was mischief managed, and in a final act of petty, brilliant spite, they added a specific enchantment directed at their greatest rival. Should Severus Snape ever try to read the map, the parchment would fill with insults from its 4 creators, Messrs. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, forever repelling his curiosity. The Marauders' map was the pinnacle of their collaborative efforts. It was a symbol of their friendship, their genius, and their utter conquest of Hogwarts. It encapsulated everything they were: clever, arrogant, loyal to each other, and utterly dismissive of the rules that governed everyone else. They had taken the ancient, sprawling castle and made it their own, its every secret laid bare on a piece of enchanted parchment. For years they used it to facilitate their adventures, until their final year, when it was confiscated by Argus Filch, who thankfully had no idea how to make it work. It would lie in his office for years, a dormant piece of magical history, waiting for a new generation of troublemakers to rediscover its secrets. While the Marauder's story is often romanticized as one of heroic friendship and light-hearted mischief, there was a darker, more persistent thread running through their Hogwarts years: their relentless and cruel treatment of Severus Snape. This was not a simple school rivalry, a balanced back and forth between competing houses. It was, by any objective measure, a campaign of bullying, with the power dynamic skewed heavily in the Marauders' favor. James and Sirius, in particular, targeted Snape with a viciousness that went far beyond typical schoolboy antagonism. The conflict, which began on their very first train ride to Hogwarts, only intensified over the years. James and Sirius were popular, handsome, and came from wealthy, respected families. They were Quidditch stars and brilliant students when they chose to apply themselves. They also had the advantage of numbers, operating as a tight-knit group of 4. Snape, by contrast, was a social outcast. He was a poor, half-blood boy with an awkward appearance and a fervent interest in the dark arts, which made him an easy and isolated target. He was also Lily Evans's closest friend, a fact that seemed to particularly enrage James, who had developed an unrequited obsession with her. The Marauders' attacks on Snape were frequent and often public. Remus Lupin would later admit that James and Sirius never missed an opportunity to hex Snape, and that he regretted his own cowardice in not standing up to them. The most infamous of these incidents occurred in their 5th year, an event so traumatic that it would be forever seared into Snape's memory. By the lake, on a sunny afternoon after their OWL exams, James and Sirius, bored and arrogant, decided to attack Snape for no other reason than, as James put it, the fact that he exists. They humiliated him in front of a crowd of students, levitating him upside down and exposing his underwear, all while laughing and showing off for the crowd. When Lily Evans rushed to his defense, demanding they leave him alone, James saw it as an opportunity to impress her, offering to let Snape go if she would go out with him. Disgusted by his arrogance and cruelty, Lily refused, defending her friend. It was then that Snape, humiliated and enraged, lashed out at her, calling her a mudblood. The word, a vile slur, shattered their friendship in an instant. For Lily, it was the final, unforgivable proof that Snape had truly embraced the dark ideology of his Slytherin house. For James, it was a victory of sorts. He had driven a wedge between Lily and his rival, even if he had earned her contempt in the process. An even more sinister event, however, had occurred earlier that same year. Sirius, in what he would later dismiss as a prank, decided to lure Snape into a trap that could have easily killed him. Snape, deeply suspicious of Remus's monthly disappearances, had been trying to uncover their secret. Sirius, with reckless cruelty, told Snape that if he wanted to find out where Lupin went, all he had to do was prod a knot on the trunk of the Whomping Willow and follow the passage underneath. He failed to mention that at the end of that passage was a fully transformed and highly dangerous werewolf. It was an act of profound malice, one that endangered not only Snape's life, but also Remus's soul, as he would have become a murderer. When James found out what Sirius had done, he realized the terrible danger and intervened, pulling Snape back from the tunnel at great risk to his own life. James's intervention saved Snape, but the incident was covered up by Dumbledore. Snape was sworn to secrecy about Remus's condition, and Sirius faced no real punishment. This relentless torment had profound and lasting consequences. It did not merely create a lifelong enemy, it actively pushed Snape further down the path of darkness. It cemented his hatred for James and Sirius, a hatred that would fester for years. This deep-seated animosity would one day motivate him, as a young Death Eater, to carry the words of a prophecy to Lord Voldemort, a prophecy that would lead the Dark Lord directly to the home of James and Lily Potter. The bullying of Severus Snape was not an amusing footnote in the Marauders' story. It was their greatest moral failure, a dark seed of cruelty that would eventually grow into the tree upon which their own happiness would be broken. For 6 long years at Hogwarts, James Potter pursued Lily Evans with a relentless and frankly obnoxious single-mindedness. He asked her out constantly, and she turned him down just as constantly. She saw him for what he was, an arrogant, bullying toarag who hexed people for fun and whose swagger she found deeply unattractive. Her fierce rejection, particularly after the incident by the lake in their 5th year, seemed to be the one thing in James's privileged life that he could not have, and it forced him to do something he had never had to do before: change. Over the summer before their 7th year, James Potter finally began to grow up. As Sirius would later tell Harry, James's head deflated a bit. He stopped using his magical talent to show off and torment people. He matured, and people began to see the good heart that had always been there, buried under layers of arrogance. This transformation was recognized by Dumbledore, who, in a move that surprised many, appointed James as head boy for their final year. To Lily Evans, who was appointed head girl, this was initially an outrage. But as they began to work together in their new roles, sharing a common room and responsibilities, she began to see the change in him for herself. The arrogant bully was gone, replaced by a young man who was still confident, but now also kind, brave, and surprisingly funny. He was fiercely loyal to his friends and, as she had seen when he saved Snape from the werewolf, capable of great courage. She saw the James Potter that his friends had always seen, and to her own surprise, she began to fall in love with him. Their romance blossomed during their 7th year, a bright spot of hope and happiness against the increasingly dark backdrop of the wizarding world. The war outside the castle walls was escalating, and the threat of Voldemort loomed over their future. This sense of imminent danger accelerated everything. Relationships forged in wartime often burn brighter and faster, and theirs was no exception. Their relationship quickly became serious. By the end of 1977, only a few months after they had started dating, Petunia Evans was getting married to Vernon Dursley, and Lily brought James as her date to her sister's wedding. They graduated from Hogwarts in the spring of 1978, 2 of the most brilliant students of their generation, deeply in love and ready to face the world together. The war was at its height, and for a young couple who knew they might not live to see old age, there was no time to waste. Sometime between the summer of 1978 and the autumn of 1979, at the age of 18, James Potter and Lily Evans were married in a quiet ceremony. They were young, they were in love, and they were soldiers. Their life together would be tragically short, but it was a life they chose to live fully, fighting for the world they hoped to build, a world they hoped their children would one day inherit. Graduation from Hogwarts in 1978 was not an entry into a world of opportunity and peace for the Marauders and their friends. It was a conscription. The First Wizarding War, which had been simmering since 1970, had erupted into a full-scale conflict. Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters were at the height of their power, terrorizing the magical and muggle communities alike. Fear and paranoia gripped the nation. It was a dark and desperate time, and for the best and bravest of the wizarding world, there was only one choice: to fight. Barely adults, James Potter, Lily Evans, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew walked straight out of the hallowed halls of Hogwarts and into the clandestine ranks of the Order of the Phoenix. This secret society, founded and led by Albus Dumbledore, was the primary resistance against Voldemort. Its members were a collection of the most skilled and courageous witches and wizards of the age, including formidable aurors like Alastor, Mad-Eye, Moody, and the Longbottoms, and trusted Hogwarts professors like Minerva McGonagall. To join the Order was to paint a target on your back, to accept that your life would be one of constant danger, secrecy, and loss. The Marauders, barely 18 years old, joined without hesitation. Their lives became a blur of secret missions, skirmishes, and the constant, gnawing fear of betrayal. The specifics of their roles within the Order are, like much of the organization's history, shrouded in secrecy. Barely adults, James Potter, Lily Evans, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew walked straight out of the hallowed halls of Hogwarts and into the clandestine ranks of the Order of the Phoenix. This secret society, founded and led by Albus Dumbledore, was the primary resistance against Voldemort. Its members were a collection of the most skilled and courageous witches and wizards of the age, including formidable aurors like Alastor, Mad-Eye, Moody, and the Longbottoms, and trusted Hogwarts professors like Minerva McGonagall. To join the Order was to paint a target on your back, to accept that your life would be one of constant danger, secrecy, and loss. The Marauders, barely 18 years old, joined without hesitation. Their lives became a blur of secret missions, skirmishes, and the constant, gnawing fear of betrayal. The specifics of their roles within the Order are, like much of the organization's history, shrouded in secrecy. What is known is that they were all active and valuable members. James and Lily, a powerful and brilliant couple, became prime targets for Voldemort. They defied him directly on 3 separate occasions, an act of such bravery that it marked them for death. These acts of defiance included Voldemort's attempt to recruit them to his cause, which they flatly refused, as well as instances where they directly escaped him or thwarted his plans. Sirius Black, a gifted duelist and a fierce fighter, was also a full-time agent for the Order. A letter from Lily to Sirius in August of 1981 mentions that he was too busy with Order business to attend Harry's first birthday, a testament to his deep involvement in the war effort. Remus Lupin, despite the intense prejudice he faced as a werewolf, also served. His affliction made him uniquely suited for a particularly dangerous and vital role: to go undercover amongst the werewolf packs that Voldemort was attempting to recruit, trying to persuade them to side with Dumbledore. On the night the Potters died, Remus was away in the north of the country on order of the Phoenix business, a lonely and perilous mission that likely saved his life. And then there was Peter. For a time, he too served in the Order, fighting alongside the friends he had always idolized. But the war was taking its toll. The Order was losing. Members were being picked off one by one. The McKinnons, Benji Fenwick, the Pruitt brothers, all brutally murdered. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia. Dumbledore knew there was a spy in their midst, a traitor feeding information directly to Voldemort. This suspicion began to poison the trust within the Order's inner circle. In a cruel twist of fate, Sirius Black, whose own family was steeped in dark arts and pure-blood fanaticism, began to suspect Remus Lupin. Perhaps it was the secrecy surrounding Remus's condition, the inherent darkness of his affliction, that made him an easy target for suspicion in Sirius's mind. This climate of fear and mistrust was the perfect breeding ground for the real traitor to operate. Around October of 1980, about a year before the Potters' deaths, Peter Pettigrew, the quiet follower, the man no one would ever suspect, became a spy for Lord Voldemort. His motivation was simple and pathetic: fear. He saw the power Voldemort was accumulating and believed the Order was doomed to lose. Always drawn to the strongest protector, he switched his allegiance from the friends who loved him to the Dark Lord, who promised him safety. He was a low-level soldier in the Order, often overlooked, which made him the perfect informant. The information he passed to Voldemort was devastating, leading directly to the deaths of many Order members, and giving the Death Eaters a crucial advantage in the war. In the midst of this escalating conflict, a moment of profound joy pierced the darkness. On July 31st, 1980, Lily Potter gave birth to a son, Harry. For a brief time, the young family was able to carve out a life for themselves in Godric's Hollow, the village where James had grown up, and where generations of Potters, and even the Peverils, were buried. But their happiness was to be short-lived. A prophecy had been made, one that foretold the birth of a child with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, born to parents who had thrice defied him. Voldemort learned of this prophecy, ironically from Severus Snape, and he interpreted it to mean the son of Lily and James Potter. Dumbledore, learning that the Potters were now Voldemort's primary target, urged them to go into hiding immediately. They retreated to their home in Godric's Hollow, protected by all the enchantments the Order could provide. For more than a year, they lived in isolation, their world shrinking to the four walls of their cottage, their only contact with the outside world being visits from their closest friends. They were safe, but they were also trapped, waiting for the day the war would inevitably find them. As the autumn of 1981 bled into winter, the threat against the Potter family became unbearable. Voldemort was hunting them, and Dumbledore knew that conventional protective enchantments would not be enough to stop him. He advised them to undertake one of the most powerful and ancient forms of magical concealment known, the Fidelius Charm. The Fidelius Charm is an immensely complex spell that takes a secret, in this case, the location of the Potter family, and magically embeds it within the soul of a single, living person. This person, known as the Secret Keeper, becomes the sole source of the information. The location becomes impossible to find. It could not be discovered by force, torture, or any other magical means. Voldemort could have pressed his face against the Potter's living room window, and he still would not have seen them inside. The secret could only be revealed if the Secret Keeper chose, voluntarily, to divulge it. It was the ultimate magical protection, a bond of absolute trust between the hidden and their guardian. The choice of Secret Keeper was obvious to everyone. It had to be Sirius Black. He was James's best friend, closer than a brother, and Harry's godfather. He was brave, powerful, and would have died 1,000 times over before betraying them. The plan was set. Sirius would be their guardian. But at the last possible moment, Sirius had an idea. It was a classic Marauder-style plan. A clever, arrogant, and ultimately fatal piece of misdirection. This person, known as the Secret Keeper, becomes the sole source of the information. The location becomes impossible to find. It could not be discovered by force, torture, or any other magical means. Voldemort could have pressed his face against the Potter's living room window, and he still would not have seen them inside. The secret could only be revealed if the Secret Keeper chose, voluntarily, to divulge it. It was the ultimate magical protection, a bond of absolute trust between the hidden and their guardian. The choice of Secret Keeper was obvious to everyone. It had to be Sirius Black. He was James's best friend, closer than a brother, and Harry's godfather. He was brave, powerful, and would have died 1,000 times over before betraying them. The plan was set. Sirius would be their guardian. But at the last possible moment, Sirius had an idea. It was a classic Marauder-style plan, a clever, arrogant, and ultimately fatal piece of misdirection. He reasoned that he was the obvious choice, and therefore he was the one Voldemort would target. The Dark Lord would hunt him, torture him, do anything to extract the secret. So Sirius proposed a double bluff. They would switch Secret Keepers at the very last minute, telling no one, not even Dumbledore. They would choose the one person Voldemort would never suspect, the one they all saw as a weak, talentless thing, who would never be entrusted with such a vital task, Peter Pettigrew. It was a decision born of Sirius's own character. He was a man who had spent his life defying expectations, outsmarting his enemies through cunning and daring. He tried to fight the war on his own terms, with a clever trick rather than straightforward caution. It was the ultimate expression of his love for James, an attempt to draw the danger onto himself. But it was also an act of profound hubris. He overestimated his own cleverness, and, far more tragically, he overestimated Peter Pettigrew's loyalty. while fatally underestimating his capacity for treachery. James and Lily, trusting their friend's judgment, agreed. The Fidelius charm was cast on October 24th, 1981, with Peter Pettigrew as the secret keeper. Peter had been a spy for Voldemort for a year. He now held the lives of his friends in the palm of his hand. He did not wait. Within a week, he went to his master and voluntarily gave up the secret. On Halloween night, 1981, Lord Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow. The protective enchantments fell away before him as he strode toward the Potter's cottage. James, hearing the front gate creak, shouted to his wife, "Lily, take Harry and go." "It's him. Go, run. I'll hold him off." He faced the Dark Lord without his wand, which he had left on the sofa. He died instantly, trying to buy his family a few precious seconds. Voldemort moved upstairs to the nursery, where Lily stood protectively in front of her son's crib. Remembering a promise he had made to Severus Snape to spare her life, Voldemort offered her a choice. "Stand aside, you silly girl. Stand aside, now." Lily refused, begging him to kill her instead, to spare her son. She stood her ground, and Voldemort cut her down with the killing curse. But her sacrifice was not in vain. By deliberately choosing to die for her son, when she had been offered the chance to live, she invoked an ancient and powerful form of protective magic. When Voldemort turned his wand on the 1-year-old Harry Potter and uttered the words Avada Kedavra, the curse rebounded off the shield of his mother's love, striking Voldemort himself and tearing him from his body, ending his reign of terror. Meanwhile, Sirius Black, feeling uneasy, had decided to check on Peter at his hiding place, as they had arranged. He found the place empty, with no signs of a struggle. A cold dread filled him. He immediately raced to Godric's Hollow on his flying motorbike. He arrived to find the house destroyed, the bodies of his best friend and his wife lying amidst the rubble. He understood in an instant what had happened. Peter had betrayed them. As Rubeus Hagrid arrived on Dumbledore's orders to retrieve the infant Harry from the wreckage, a grief-stricken and vengeful Sirius offered to take his godson, but Hagrid refused, steadfast in his mission. In a daze, Sirius gave Hagrid his motorbike to transport Harry safely and set off to find the man responsible. He cornered Peter Pettigrew the next day, November 1st, on a crowded Muggle street. But Peter was ready. Before Sirius could act, Peter began to scream for all the witnesses to hear. "Lily and James, Sirius, how could you?" He then pulled out his own wand, unleashed a massive blasting curse that tore a crater in the street, killing 12 Muggles in the process. In the chaos of the explosion, he severed his own index finger, transformed into his rat animagus form, and scurried into the sewers, vanishing from sight. When the Aurors from the Ministry of Magic arrived, they found a scene of utter devastation. A crater in the street, 12 dead Muggles, and a single bloody finger. And in the middle of it all stood Sirius Black, laughing. It was the hysterical, broken laughter of a man whose entire world had just been destroyed by the most profound betrayal imaginable. But to the Aurors, it looked like the laughter of a madman glorying in his crime. The evidence was overwhelming. Everyone knew Sirius had been the Potter's secret keeper. Eyewitnesses had heard Peter accuse him, and now Peter and 12 muggles were dead, apparently at his hand. Sad. On the orders of the zealous head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Barty Crouch Sr., Sirius Black was arrested and sent directly to the wizarding prison of Azkaban, without the formality of a trial. The fellowship of the Marauders was broken, its story ending not in glory, but in murder, betrayal, and a terrible, tragic lie. The fall of Lord Voldemort on Halloween night in 1981 was a moment of euphoric celebration for the wizarding world. The war was over. But for the surviving Marauders, it was the beginning of a long, dark winter of the soul. Each was condemned to a prison of his own making, scattered and broken, living in a world that no longer made sense. For 12 years, they would endure their solitude, unaware that the threads of their shared past were slowly, inexorably, pulling them back together. For Remus Lupin, the news came like a series of hammer blows. He was on a mission for the Order in the north of the country when he heard James and Lily murdered. Voldemort gone. And then, the final soul-crushing report. Sirius Black, his brilliant, brave, rebellious friend, had been the traitor all along. He had betrayed James and Lily, and then murdered Peter Pettigrew and a street full of muggles before being captured. In the space of a few days, Remus lost every person he considered family. His 3 best friends were gone, 2 dead, 1 a mass-murdering traitor locked away in Azkaban. The Order of the Phoenix disbanded, its members returning to their families and their lives. But Remus had no one to return to. His mother, Hope, had passed away, and while his father, Lyle, would have welcomed him, Remus refused to endanger him, still consumed by the guilt and fear of his condition. He was utterly alone. The end of the war, a cause for joy for everyone else, was for him the beginning of a profound and unending loneliness. His life became a hand-to-mouth existence. The wizarding world, even in peacetime, was a hostile place for a werewolf. A wave of anti-werewolf legislation, much of it drafted by ministry officials like Dolores Umbridge, made it nearly impossible for him to find steady employment. He was forced to take on a series of menial jobs, tasks far below his considerable intelligence and magical ability, always living in fear. He knew he would have to leave each job before his colleagues noticed his pattern of growing sick and disappearing once a month at the full moon. During this time, a revolutionary breakthrough in potioneering offered a glimmer of hope. The invention of the Wolf's Bane potion. This complex and expensive concoction did not cure lycanthropy, but it allowed a werewolf to retain their human mind during the transformation, rendering them a harmless, sleepy wolf instead of a mindless beast. For Remus, whose greatest fear was harming an innocent while transformed, this was a miraculous discovery. But the ingredients were incredibly expensive, and he was living in abject poverty. He had no way to afford it, and no way to obtain it without admitting what he was, which would have cost him what little work he could find. So he continued his lonely, itinerant existence. He drifted from place to place, his clothes becoming more patched and shabby, his face lined with premature age and worry. By 1993, Albus Dumbledore found him living in a tumble-down, semi-derelict cottage in Yorkshire. A man hollowed out by grief, poverty, and a dozen years of profound isolation. He was a ghost, haunted by the memory of the friends he had loved, and the one he now believed had destroyed them all. Sirius Black was thrown into the high-security wizarding prison of Azkaban, a fortress on a desolate island in the North Sea, guarded by Dementors. These foul, soul-sucking creatures fed on human happiness, forcing their prisoners to relive their worst memories until they were driven to madness or despair. Most prisoners did not last long, but Sirius Black survived for 12 years. He had no way to afford it, and no way to obtain it without admitting what he was, which would have cost him what little work he could find. So he continued his lonely, itinerant existence. He drifted from place to place, his clothes becoming more patched and shabby, his face lined with premature age and worry. By 1993, Albus Dumbledore found him living in a tumble-down, semi-derelict cottage in Yorkshire. A man hollowed out by grief, poverty, and a dozen years of profound isolation. He was a ghost, haunted by the memory of the friends he had loved, and the one he now believed had destroyed them all. Sirius Black was thrown into the high-security wizarding prison of Azkaban, a fortress on a desolate island in the North Sea, guarded by Dementors. These foul, soul-sucking creatures fed on human happiness, forcing their prisoners to relive their worst memories until they were driven to madness or despair. Most prisoners did not last long, but Sirius Black survived for 12 years. He endured the unendurable through a combination of two factors that made him unique among the prison's population. The first was his innocence. The Dementors fed on happy thoughts, stripping them away until nothing but misery remained. But Sirius's obsessive, all-consuming thought was not a happy one. It was the cold, hard fact. I am innocent. Peter Pettigrew is alive, and he betrayed them. This thought was not a source of joy for the Dementors to consume. It was a burning ember of rage and injustice that kept his mind anchored in reality. While he still suffered terribly, reliving the night of James and Lily's death and his own fatal mistake in trusting Peter, the core of his sanity was preserved by this single, unshakable truth. He also felt he deserved to be there, not for the crimes he was accused of, but for his own role in their deaths. It was his idea to switch secret keepers, a mistake that cost him everything. This guilt was a form of self-flagellation that, paradoxically, helped him endure. His second, and most crucial advantage, was his secret animagus ability. The Ministry had no idea he was an unregistered animagus. When the despair became too much to bear, he could transform into his dog form. The Dementors, who are blind, sense humans by their complex emotions. The feelings of a dog are less nuanced, more primal. As Padfoot, Sirius found that the Dementor's influence was lessened. They could still sense him, but the crushing despair did not affect him as deeply. The transformation gave him a refuge, a way to preserve his mind when it was on the brink of shattering. It was this secret that allowed him to hold on, year after agonizing year, in the cold, dark hell of his cell. While Remus suffered in poverty and Sirius wasted away in prison, Peter Pettigrew lived a life of quiet comfort. After escaping into the sewers, a rat among rats, he sought out a wizarding family to take him in. His goal was simple: to hide. He was terrified of Voldemort's old allies, the Death Eaters, many of whom were still at large. They believed he had betrayed the Dark Lord, leading to his downfall, and would surely kill him if they ever found him. He was also, of course, hiding from the Ministry of Magic, and anyone who might recognize him. He found his sanctuary with the Weasley family. He became the pet rat of the young Percy Weasley, and later was passed down to his younger brother Ron. For 12 years he lived as Scabbers. He was a common garden rat, unusually long-lived, but otherwise unremarkable. He ate, he slept in Ron's pocket, and he listened. Living with a wizarding family, especially one with a father who worked at the ministry, was the perfect way to keep an ear to the ground, to listen for any news of the Dark Lord's potential return. It was a pathetic existence for a wizard, a life lived in constant, gnawing fear. But for Peter Pettigrew, it was safe. And for him, safety was all that mattered. In the summer of 1993, an event of pure, dumb luck changed everything. The Weasley family won the Daily Prophet Grand Prize Galleon draw and used the money to visit Bill Weasley in Egypt. The newspaper ran a front-page story about their trip, complete with a large photograph of the entire family standing in front of a pyramid. Around the same time, the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, made a routine inspection of Azkaban. As a small courtesy, he left his copy of the Daily Prophet with prisoner Sirius Black. In the gloom of his cell, Sirius idly scanned the paper, and then he saw it. The photograph of the smiling, red-headed family. And there, perched on the shoulder of the youngest boy, was a rat. A fat, scruffy-looking rat with a missing toe on its front paw. For Sirius, it was like a bolt of lightning. He knew that rat. He knew that the biggest piece of Peter Pettigrew they had found after the explosion was his severed finger. He stared at the picture, and 12 years of grief, guilt, and cold fury coalesced into a single, burning purpose. Peter was alive, and the photograph caption told him exactly where he was, at Hogwarts, with Harry. The thought that the traitor who had sold James and Lily was now sleeping in his son's dormitory was more than Sirius could bear. The Dementors heard him muttering it in his sleep. "He's at Hogwarts. He's at Hogwarts." They and the Ministry assumed he was talking about Harry. They believed the loyal servant was finally going to finish the job his master had started. But Sirius's hunt was for the rat. The knowledge that Peter was alive and near Harry gave him what he had not had in 12 years: hope. And with that hope came the strength to escape. He transformed into his dog form. The malnutrition he had suffered had made him shockingly thin, and as a dog, he was able to slip through the bars of his cell. He padded past the Dementors, who could not sense his canine mind, and slipped out of the fortress. He swam the icy waters from the island of Azkaban back to the mainland, and began the long journey south, a gaunt, grim specter driven by one thought: revenge. The escape of Sirius Black sent a wave of panic through the wizarding world. He was, to the public, Voldemort's most devoted follower, a crazed mass murderer who had broken out of the supposedly inescapable prison of Azkaban. The Ministry, convinced he was hunting Harry Potter, stationed Dementors around the grounds of Hogwarts for protection, a move that proved far more dangerous to the students than the fugitive himself. Sirius, gaunt and desperate, spent months lurking in the woods around Hogsmeade, living off rats and scraps, waiting for an opportunity to get to Peter. He made one failed attempt to enter Gryffindor Tower, slashing the portrait of the fat lady in his frustration, which only heightened the fear within the castle. He was a ghost at the edge of Harry's 3rd year, a shadowy threat that Harry was being trained to fight by the new defense against the dark arts teacher, a kind, shabby, and strangely familiar man named Remus Lupin. The threads of the past finally converged on a single night in June of 1994. As Ron, Harry, and Hermione were leaving Hagrid's hut, Scabbers, who had been growing increasingly frantic as the year went on, made a break for it. Ron chased him down to the base of the Whomping Willow, where a huge black dog suddenly appeared, seizing Ron by the leg and dragging him, along with the struggling Scabbers, into a hole at the tree's roots. Harry and Hermione, believing the dog was the murderous Sirius Black, followed them down the secret passage. The tunnel led them to a dusty, dilapidated room in the Shrieking Shack. There, the black dog transformed into the emaciated, wild-eyed man Harry had seen on wanted posters, Sirius Black. Before he could explain, he was interrupted by the arrival of Remus Lupin, who had seen their dots on a certain magical map he had confiscated from Harry earlier in the year. He had seen Sirius, the children, and most shockingly of all, a 4th dot he thought he would never see again: Peter Pettigrew. What followed was a tense, emotional, and violent confrontation that rewrote 12 years of history. To Harry's astonishment, Lupin embraced Sirius as a brother. Together, they turned on Ron and forced Scabbers from his grasp. With a combined spell, they forced the rat to transform, and in a flash of light, the fat, balding, terrified man with a missing finger stood before them: Peter Pettigrew. The truth, in all its ugly detail, finally came out. In a torrent of accusations and pathetic excuses, the story of the betrayal was laid bare. Peter confessed to being the secret keeper, to serving Voldemort out of fear, to framing Sirius for his own crimes. Sirius and Remus, reunited after 12 years of bitter misunderstanding, were consumed with a desire for revenge. They were ready to kill Peter right there in the shack, to finally deliver the justice that had been denied for so long. But Harry, seeing the pathetic, sniveling man cowering on the floor, intervened. "You can't kill him," he said, standing between his father's friends and their betrayer. He argued that his father wouldn't have wanted his best friends to become murderers. He insisted they take Peter back to the castle to hand him over to the Dementors. That way, they could clear Sirius's name. Reluctantly, Sirius and Remus agreed. They bound Peter and began the journey back to the castle, a strange procession of old friends, old enemies, and the children caught in the middle. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed that the tragedy was over. Sirius was going to be free. He offered Harry a home, a chance to finally leave the Dursleys and live with his godfather, the family he was meant to have. For Harry, it was a dream come true. But the curse of the Marauders was not so easily broken. As they emerged from the tunnel under the Whomping Willow, the full moon broke through the clouds. Remus, who in his haste to reach the shack had forgotten to take his wolfsbane potion, froze. His body began to contort, the horrifying transformation taking hold. Sirius, in a desperate attempt to protect the children, transformed into Padfoot to try and contain the werewolf. In the chaos, as the wolf and the dog battled, Peter Pettigrew saw his chance. He snatched Lupin's fallen wand, transformed back into a rat, and scurried away into the darkness, escaping once more. The moment of vindication was gone. Their proof had vanished. Sirius was forced to flee for his life, escaping the Dementor's kiss only with Harry's help. The truth had been revealed, but only to a handful of people. To the rest of the world, Sirius Black was still a murderer, and Peter Pettigrew was still a dead hero. The reunion in the Shrieking Shack had not ended the tragedy. It had merely set the stage for its final, bloody act. The escape of Peter Pettigrew from the grounds of Hogwarts set in motion the final chapters in the lives of the surviving Marauders. Though their brotherhood was irrevocably broken, their destinies remained intertwined, each playing a final, crucial role in the war their generation had started. Their story, which began with 4 boys united in mischief, would end with 4 men defined by sacrifice, cowardice, and enduring love. Peter Pettigrew, known to the world as Wormtail, fled to Albania, where he sought out the last vestiges of his vanquished master. He found Voldemort as a weak, spectral form, less than a ghost, and nursed him back to strength. It was Peter who performed the dark ritual in the graveyard of Little Hangleton, sacrificing his own hand to brew the potion that would restore the Dark Lord to a physical body. He served his master out of fear, a cowering, pathetic servant. His end came in 1998, in the cellars of Malfoy Manor, when Harry Potter reminded him of the life debt he owed him, for Harry had saved his life in the Shrieking Shack. Peter hesitated for a single fatal moment in his attempt to strangle the boy. The magical silver hand Voldemort had given him as a reward for his service turned on him, interpreting his fleeting moment of mercy as a betrayal of its master. and choked the life from him. In his final second, a faint echo of his old Gryffindor loyalty, a flicker of gratitude to the son of the friend he had betrayed, was the cause of his own demise. Sirius Black, or Padfoot, lived the rest of his short life as a fugitive. Though his name was never cleared, he dedicated himself to the two things that mattered most to him: fighting Voldemort and protecting Harry. He rejoined the reformed Order of the Phoenix, but was forced to hide in his hated ancestral home, a prison of a different kind. His rebellious spirit chafed under the confinement, and he grew reckless. In 1996, during the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, he raced to Harry's side to defend him from Death Eaters. He fought with the joyous, arrogant flair of his youth, dueling his hated cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange. But in his recklessness, he was struck by a curse that sent him falling backward through a mysterious whispering veil in the death chamber. He was gone before his body hit the ground, dead at the age of 36. He died a hero, fighting for the son of the brother he had lost. Remus Lupin, Moony, also rejoined the Order, his quiet courage and wisdom making him one of its most steadfast members. In the years that followed, he found a love he never thought he deserved with a young, vibrant Auror named Nymphadora Tonks. He resisted her love at first, his self-loathing and fear of his condition, making him believe he was unworthy and a danger to her. But her love was as fierce and stubborn as she was, and they married, even having a son, Teddy. For a brief time, Remus knew the happiness of a family, but the war demanded its price. On May 2nd, 1998, during the final battle of Hogwarts, Remus and Tonks fought side by side to defend the school. Both were killed in the fighting, leaving their infant son an orphan, just as Remus's friends had left Harry. He died as he had lived, a good man, fighting bravely against a world that had often shown him little kindness. And James Potter, Prongs, who had died so many years before, had the last word. His legacy was not one of mischief or arrogance, but of sacrifice. The love he and Lily shared, the love that led them to defy Voldemort and ultimately die for their son, became the foundational magic of the entire saga. It was the power the Dark Lord knows not, the magic that protected Harry, that flowed through his veins, and that ultimately gave him the strength to face and defeat Voldemort once and for all. James's true legacy was Harry himself, the boy who lived. The story of the Marauders, then, is a microcosm of the entire Wizarding War. It is a story of love and hatred, of loyalty and betrayal, of the brilliant light of friendship, and the encroaching darkness of fear. It teaches us that our choices, not our abilities or our circumstances, define who we are. It is a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be broken, but that the love that forged them can echo through generations, becoming a magic powerful enough to save the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the lore of Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs.